What would you do if your sister was about to marry a man hiding $1 million crime? When Claire Turner discovered her sister's fiancé was orchestrating a massive fraud, she faced an impossible choice: stay silent or risk everything to expose the truth. On what should have been the happiest day of her sister's life, Claire stood up and shattered it all. Now, as Hannah struggles to rebuild her life from the wreckage, deeper secrets emerge, and the fight for justice is only beginning. This is a story of betrayal, courage, and reclaiming a name no one will ever tarnish again. Chapter 1. The sister they didn't want at the table. I always thought the hardest part of losing our parents was learning to stand alone. I never imagined the real betrayal would come wearing a diamond ring. It was a cold, sharp truth I couldn't shake as I sat across from my younger sister Hannah at Maison Veuve, the little cafe in Boston where we'd met for Saturday brunches ever since college. Steam rose from her lavender tea as she gushed about Lucas Whitmore, fiancé, her boss, and if I was being honest, the one man who made every nerve in my body hum with alarm. "Claire, he's incredible," Hannah said, her brown eyes glowing. "He's taking me to the Hamptons next weekend. His family estate is like something out of a movie." I forced a smile. It wasn't that I didn't want her to be happy. After everything we'd endured, our father's failed business, the foreclosure, Mom's battle with cancer, I wanted Hannah to have the fairy tale. But Lucas Whitmore, every instinct in me screamed no. "You've only known him a year," I said gently, stirring my coffee. "A year and 3 months, she corrected, laughing. "And we've been inseparable since month 2. Lucas isn't like other men." I knew that tone, the same tone she used when we were kids, and she'd beg to keep a stray kitten, convinced it would love her forever. The same tone that had ended in heartbreak more times than I cared to count. I bit my tongue. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a 29-year-old marketing director at Whitmore Capital Partners, and she was marrying its 37-year-old CEO. The power imbalance alone made my skin crawl. But it wasn't just that. I'd done my homework. Whitmore Capital had exploded onto the Boston financial scene 5 years ago, practically overnight. Their returns seemed almost too good to be true. An analyst's dream on paper, but to an auditor's eye, suspiciously glossy. And when I'd tried to dig deeper through the SEC's public filings, something had fell off. Too many shell subsidiaries, too many offshore ties, too few answers. But I had no proof, just gut instinct. And in Hannah's world, instinct didn't compete with love. "Lucas is inviting us to dinner next week," she added, breaking into my thoughts. "You'll love him, Claire. He's so warm in private. You've only seen his business face." That was intentional. At every function I'd attended, networking events, industry galas, Lucas had barely acknowledged me. When we did speak, he'd toss me a thin smile, eyes cool and assessing, before drifting back to whatever power circle he was cultivating. I was the government auditor in the room, the one person he couldn't charm. I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear and tried to sound neutral. "I come because if there was one thing I'd learned in a lifetime of loving my sister, it was this. When Hannah wanted to believe in someone, she'd move heaven and earth to protect that belief. If I tried to warn her now, she'd dig in deeper. Better to observe. Better to wait for the cracks to show themselves." That moment came faster than I expected. A week later, I found myself standing awkwardly in the gleaming marble foyer of the Whitmore estate in East Hampton, glass of champagne in hand. The place was absurd. High ceilings, priceless art, staff moving silently through the halls, old money dressed up in modern opulence. Lucas was all smiles that night, flawless in a charcoal suit, every inch the gracious host. He introduced Hannah around like a prized possession, his hand firm on her waist. I watched closely. Every compliment was a performance, every gesture rehearsed. And then, during cocktails, I spotted a familiar figure across the room. Nathan Cole. My breath caught. Nathan, my ex-boyfriend. Nathan, who'd once worked at Morgan & Bell Compliance. Nathan, who was now shaking hands with Lucas Whitmore. He looked up, caught my eye, and something flickered. Surprise. Guilt. I wasn't sure. Before I could move toward him, Lucas appeared at my side, smile cool. "I hear you're with the SEC," he said smoothly. "You must enjoy finding fault in others." "It's about ensuring transparency," I replied evenly. He chuckled, the sound low and patronizing. "Such a noble mission." Then he drifted away, leaving the words hanging like smoke in the air. That night, as I stood alone beneath the estate's crystal chandeliers, my phone buzzed. One new message. From Nathan. "We need to talk, urgent." I stared at Nathan's message long after the screen dimmed. "We need to talk, urgent." After everything between us, after 2 years of radio silence, why now? And why tonight, here of all places? I debated replying, phone gripped so tightly my knuckles whitened. Across the room, I caught glimpses of Hannah's laughter as Lucas whispered something in her ear. She looked radiant, carefree, enchanted. How much of that glow was love, and how much was illusion? I had to know. "Where?" I finally texted back. "The garden, 20 minutes, came the reply. I set my glass down and slipped quietly toward the patio doors, my pulse accelerating with each step. Outdoors, the night was crisp. Lanterns hung from manicured trees, casting soft pools of light. Beyond the noise of the party, the garden lay in hushed darkness. I spotted Nathan leaning against a stone balustrade, hands in his coat pockets, eyes shadowed. The sight of him stirred old memories, ones I didn't have time for now. "You work for him?" I asked, voice low but sharp. He exhaled. "I do, not by choice anymore." I folded my arms. "Explain." Nathan straightened, tension in every line of his body. "He recruited me 6 months ago, said he wanted my compliance background to help optimize reporting. It started innocently enough, but the more I saw, Claire, it's bad." "How bad?" I pressed. "Bad enough I'm documenting everything," he said grimly. "I can't risk sending it from inside the company. His IT chief monitors everything, but the patterns, offshore transfers, shell companies, misstated fund performance, it's textbook securities fraud." My breath caught. So my instincts hadn't been wrong, but hearing it confirmed by Nathan was a punch to the gut. "You need to take this to the SEC," I said. "I will. I've been building a file." His gaze flicked toward the house. "But if he suspects, you know what he's capable of." I thought of Lucas's controlled charm, the subtle possessiveness in every touch with Hannah. Yes, I knew, far too well. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Because Hannah's in deeper than she realizes, and if Lucas crashes, he'll take her down with him." A knot formed in my stomach. Hannah had always been trusting, believing the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it, and Lucas had woven himself into every part of her life. Nathan's voice softened. "I know how much she means to you, Claire, and I know you'll do the right thing." A flicker of the man I'd once loved shone through. But this wasn't about us, not anymore. I drew a steadying breath. "I need everything you have, and I need it now." Nathan nodded. "I'll get it to you, discreetly." I glanced back toward the house, where laughter and champagne sparkled in the night. Hannah had no idea her perfect world was built on a fault line. "Be careful," I warned. "I always am," he replied, but the shadow in his eyes told me otherwise. I slipped back into the party, pulse still racing. Across the room, Lucas caught my eye for a brief, chilling moment. An unspoken warning. I forced a neutral smile and drifted toward Hannah, who grabbed my hand excitedly. "Isn't tonight amazing?" she beamed. "Lucas has this way of making everything feel safe." Safe. The word hit me like ice. I squeezed her hand, swallowing the urge to scream the truth then and there. "Not yet." not without proof, not without a plan. Later that night, in the solitude of my Boston apartment, I opened my laptop. My SEC credentials unlocked deeper systems. Watch lists, flagged entities, patterns invisible to the public. I ran a fresh query on Whitmore Capital. The results chilled me. Multiple flagged anomalies, offshore cash flow inconsistencies, high-risk transaction patterns. And at the bottom, preliminary risk score, elevated, review recommended. My phone buzzed again. Nathan, this time with an encrypted link. Initial files, more to come. I clicked through the documents, emails, spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts. It was damning. It was enough to launch an investigation. But tomorrow, Hannah would announce her wedding date. And if I blew this too soon, I might lose her forever. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was my sister's life. And I had just crossed the line between auditor and avenger. Do you think Claire will be able to save her sister before it's too late? Or will exposing the truth tear them apart? Don't miss the next chapter. Chapter 2. The email they shouldn't have sent. Some truths arrive as a whisper. Others crash into your life like a grenade. That morning, I opened my inbox, and the countdown began. The sun had barely risen over Boston when my phone vibrated, dragging me from restless sleep. Bleary-eyed, I reached for it. One new email. From SEC Alert System Subject. Preliminary flags detected. Whitmore Capital Partners. Review urgently. I sat bolt upright. Heart hammering, I unlocked my laptop and logged into the secure portal. There it was. Bright red across my screen. High-risk transaction pattern, multiple flagged anomalies. Immediate review recommended. It wasn't just my gut anymore. It wasn't just Nathan's warning. Now the system itself had picked up what I feared most. I stared at the cascading list of irregularities, offshore transfers inconsistent with declared operations. Incoherent fund flow patterns in Q2, Q3 subsidiary ownership structures flagged as opaque. The deeper I read, the colder I felt. Lucas Whitmore wasn't just running a fast and loose fund. He was orchestrating something far worse. I barely noticed the knock at my door. It wasn't until a second, louder rap broke through my fog that I registered it. When I opened the door, Nathan stood there. Pale, tense, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. "I brought the rest," he said, voice low. "Can I come in?" I nodded. Stepping aside, he crossed the room, pulling out a thumb drive. "Encrypted, no trace," he added. "How bad is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Nathan's eyes met mine. "Worse than we thought. Lucas is prepping for a major expansion push. New markets, new investors. If this goes through, he'll suck in millions more before it all collapses." My mind raced. Hannah's face flashed before me, trusting and radiant beneath that chandelier. How much of her life was already tangled in this web? Nathan continued. "There's more. His IT chief accidentally copied me on an internal thread. It confirms they know the SEC systems have picked up anomalies." My stomach dropped. "They know?" He nodded grimly. "They're panicking, trying to cover tracks. If they think anyone inside is leaking, I'm done." "You're risking a lot coming here," I said quietly. Nathan's mouth tightened. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent, not with Hannah in the middle of this. For a beat, neither of us spoke. Old wounds hung between us, never quite healed. But in this moment, the past didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the truth. "I need to take this to the commission," I said. "You should," Nathan replied. "But Claire, be careful. Lucas is dangerous when cornered." Dangerous. The word settled in my bones. As Nathan left, I uploaded the files to my encrypted SEC channel. Within minutes, my direct line pinged. Derek Williams, Enforcement Division. "Claire, just saw your upload. We need to talk." I called him immediately. "Claire," Derek said, no preamble. "I've looped in forensics. This is actionable. We're flagging Whitmore Capital for immediate escalation." Relief and dread warred within me. But here's the thing, Derek continued. You're close to this, family close. Officially, you'll need to recuse once we open a full investigation. I swallowed hard, I understand. Unofficially? He added, voice softening. If you have more, send it now. We may be racing against a shredder. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Understood. After I hung up, I stared at my screen. An hour ago, it had all felt theoretical. Now the machine was in motion, and there was no stopping it. Across town, Hannah was likely sipping coffee, finalizing wedding invites, blissfully unaware her fiancé's empire was crumbling beneath their feet. I glanced at the calendar. 3 weeks to the wedding. If I moved too fast, I could shatter her world before I had full proof. If I waited too long, Lucas might bury everything and drag her with him. I needed time. Time I might not have. And then another email arrived, this time from an anonymous address. We know someone is watching. The next move is yours. I stared at the anonymous email until the words blurred. We know someone is watching. The next move is yours. A threat or a test? Either way, it meant Lucas's camp was aware, maybe not of me specifically, but of a leak somewhere. And in that game, uncertainty was the sharpest blade. I closed my laptop and forced myself to breathe. There was no turning back now. By mid-morning, I was in my office at the SEC Boston field office, fingers flying across the keyboard. Derek had fast-tracked the internal review. I could see the file activity already spiking. Enforcement analysts polling transaction reports, forensic teams tracing offshore movements. The wheels of the government turned slowly at times. But not today. Not when someone like Lucas Whitmore was under the microscope. Between pulls of black coffee, I reviewed Nathan's files again. Each spreadsheet was more damning than the last. Offshore accounts linked through barely disguised shells, performance reports doctored to lure new investors, and worst of all, emails from Lucas himself. Carefully worded but clear in intent, we create the narrative clients need to see. If the internal auditors ask questions, refer them to Thomas Anderson. He knows the language. The man wasn't sloppy. He was deliberate, which meant he'd have a fallback plan, and people loyal enough or scared enough to help him cover it. My phone buzzed again. Nathan. You free? He texted. Urgent. I glanced at the clock. Just past 11 a.m. 15 minutes. My office, I replied. When he arrived, his face was drawn. He closed the door behind him, tension radiating off him. I think they're on to me, he said without preamble. My blood ran cold. What happened? It pinged me about a login irregularity this morning. I used an air-gapped laptop for the dump, but they're sniffing for leaks. I swore under my breath. You need to cover yourself. I know, he said grimly. But I had to tell you one more thing. Lucas is accelerating timelines. He's calling for an emergency leadership meeting this weekend. To do what? Clean house, Nathan said. Destroy records, shut down shell pathways, maybe more. I swallowed hard, and Hannah? She's booked to fly with him to Nassau next week. He's using her as a cover, a romantic getaway while he moves assets. My chest tightened. Lucas wasn't just dangerous, he was ruthless, and he wouldn't hesitate to use my sister as a shield. I have to warn her, I said, more to myself than to Nathan. Carefully, he cautioned. She's still under his spell. If you push too hard without proof, I knew. God, I knew. If I lost her trust now, Lucas would lock her in tighter than ever. I need the full flight details. Anything you can find, I told him. Nathan nodded. I'll get it to you. After he left, I sat in the dim light of my office, the hum of the building around me fading into background noise. Hannah's smile haunted me. Safe, she'd called him. Safe. The man plotting financial ruin behind closed doors. The man ready to use her to cover his tracks. I opened a new draft message to Derek. We need emergency action. Lucas Whitmore is preparing to destroy evidence and move funds offshore. Family member at risk. Requesting urgent priority. I hit send. Seconds later, Derek replied, received, moving to secure warrant. Claire, off the record, be prepared. We may need to act during the wedding itself. The words chilled me. The wedding, in 2 weeks. A public spectacle, the perfect smokescreen, and now I faced an impossible choice. Let it proceed and risk losing everything, or step in and risk losing my sister forever. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion washing over me. Another ping. Incoming call, Hannah. I stared at the screen, pulse spiking. Of all times, why now? I answered. Claire? Her voice was bright, breathless. You won't believe it. Lucas just booked us a trip to Nassau. He says it'll be a surprise honeymoon before the wedding. Isn't that amazing? The air seemed to thin around me. My throat worked. That's wonderful, I managed, voice strangled. I wanted you to be the first to know, she said warmly. I'm so happy, Claire. I've never felt so sure about anything. I closed my eyes, because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. By the time Hannah returned from Nassau, if she returned, there might not be a wedding left to save. Will Claire risk everything to protect her sister, or will Lucas tighten his grip first? Don't miss the next chapter. Chapter 3. The day she chose to fight back. There is a line you don't cross in a family. I crossed it with a single sentence, and there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Hannah's voice echoed in my head. So bright, so certain. I've never felt so sure about anything. God, if she only knew. At 4:17 a.m., I gave up trying. I rose from bed, poured a cup of stale coffee, and sat at my dining table surrounded by files, Nathan's documents, SEC-flagged reports, internal emails. One glaring truth stared back at me from every page. Lucas Whitmore was about to commit financial arson, and my sister was standing too close to the flame. I needed a plan, a way to stop him without driving Hannah further into his arms. By sunrise, I was still no closer to an answer, but I knew one thing. Silence was no longer an option. My phone buzzed. Nathan. Update. Lucas moving Nassau trip up, leaving tomorrow, 7:00 a.m. flight. I stared at the screen. Tomorrow? He was accelerating the timeline. Damn him. I stood, heart racing, and paced the room. If Lucas moved funds while abroad, the SEC might lose jurisdiction on key accounts, and Hannah, sweet, trusting Hannah, would be trapped in the middle. I had less than 24 hours. I reached for my phone and hit Derek's number. Claire? He answered, voice tight. You saw Nathan's message? I did, I said. What's our move? We're fast-tracking the warrant, Derek said. But Claire, if you're too close, you need to step back now. I closed my eyes. The hardest words to hear. She's my sister, Derek, I said quietly. I can't step back. A pause. Then be careful, he said at last. And if you see anything we can use, send it, no matter how small. Understood. I ended the call and sat back, staring out at the gray Boston morning. I had a decision to make. Warn Hannah now and risk her disbelief, or wait and pray the SEC moved fast enough. In the end, love won over strategy. I couldn't let her fly out blind. I grabbed my coat and keys and drove straight to Hannah's apartment in Back Bay. The streets were quiet, the city still, half asleep. I parked and climbed the familiar staircase 2 at a time. She answered in pajama shorts and an oversized t-shirt, surprised but smiling. Claire, what are you doing here? She asked, stepping aside. I entered, nerves taut. Hannah, I said, voice steady. We need to talk. Now. Her smile faltered. What is it? I took a deep breath. There's something wrong with Lucas's business. The SEC has flagged it. He's moving funds offshore and taking you to Nassau to cover it. Silence. Then, laughter. Thin, disbelieving. Claire, she said, shaking her head. This again? You've never liked him. This isn't about liking him, I said, the words sharp. It's about protecting you. Her eyes flashed. And what? You expect me to cancel my wedding because of an alert? It's not just an alert, I said, pulling out my phone. Nathan's evidence. I've seen it. Derek's team is moving now. Her face paled slightly, but stubbornness flared. You're ruining this, she whispered. You're jealous. You've always been jealous. The words hit harder than any punch. I swallowed. This isn't about me. It's about saving you from disaster. She shook her head. I need time to think. Hannah. No. She backed away. Please, Claire, just give me space. I hesitated, heart aching, then nodded. For now, I said softly, but I won't let him take you down with him. I turned and walked out, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. By the time I stepped out into the cold air, my heart felt heavier than my coat. I had pushed her too far, or maybe not far enough. Every instinct told me I'd done the right thing, warned her before it was too late. But every look in Hannah's eyes screamed that I'd also driven a wedge deep between us. Lucas had worked hard to cement himself in her heart, in her mind. Undoing that grip would take more than words. It would take proof she couldn't ignore. I gripped the steering wheel as I sat in my car outside her building, fighting the urge to go back, to say more. But I couldn't force her. She had to see it for herself. Nathan's earlier words replayed in my head. If he suspects, you know what he's capable of. And now, with Hannah reacting like this, I knew Lucas would tighten the noose. I headed straight to the SEC office. By the time I arrived, Derek was already waiting in the conference room, a thick file in hand. His face was grim. Lucas's team has started deleting files, he said without preamble. Forensics picked up traces this morning. How much is gone? I asked. Not enough to save him, Derek replied. Nathan's dump gave us a head start, but they're moving fast. I swallowed hard. And the trip to Nassau? Confirmed, he said. Flight manifests match what Nathan sent. They depart at 7:00 a.m. tomorrow. Private jet, shell company listed as the charter client. I clenched my jaw. It was happening, and Hannah was walking straight into it. I warned her, I said quietly. She didn't believe me, Derek exhaled. That was always going to be the risk. I sat, staring at the conference table, its polished surface blurring. There had to be something else, one more angle. What about Thomas Anderson? I asked suddenly. Derek looked intrigued. Lucas's partner, I nodded. He's deeper in this than he lets on. Nathan's emails suggest he's handled most of the offshore structuring. Derek tapped a pen against the file. We've been building a parallel case on him. Anderson's nervous, but not stupid. What if we make him feel cornered? I said, voice hardening. People like him don't go down with the ship. If we apply enough pressure, he might flip. Derek considered it. I'll assign a team to lean on him, quietly. I nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. Nathan. He knows. 2 words, but they sent a spike of ice through my veins. I called him immediately. How? I asked. He confronted IT, Nathan said, voice low. Someone tipped him off about the flagged patterns. He's paranoid, packing files, wiping drives. I think he suspects me. Can you get out? I asked sharply. I'll try, Nathan said. But Claire, you need to be ready. He's going to move faster now, and if he even suspects Hannah's wavering. I closed my eyes. She was already at risk. Now she was in the center of the storm. Stay safe, I told him. As the call ended, I knew there was no more time to hesitate. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights of Boston twinkling beyond the window. I pulled out my father's old journal, the one he'd kept during his business's collapse. A line from it burned in my mind. When the house starts to burn, you don't debate the architecture, you get the people you love out. And so I made my decision. I would go to that wedding. I would gather every last piece of evidence I could, and if it meant burning every bridge between myself and Hannah to save her, I would light the match myself. Will Claire's plan expose Lucas before it's too late? Or will he turn the wedding into his final cover-up? Don't miss the next chapter, Chapter 4, The Toast That Shattered Everything. Some weddings change a life, some expose a lie, and some leave the whole room gasping before the cake is even cut. I had never dressed for battle in a cocktail dress before. As I zipped myself into a sleek navy gown that morning, I stared into the mirror and reminded myself why I was doing this. Not to ruin a wedding, not to ruin my sister's happiness, but to stop her from marrying a man who was about to take her and everyone around her down with him. You can't fight love with logic, my father used to say. He was right. But sometimes you could fight love with truth. Nathan had sent a final encrypted file that morning, the smoking gun. An internal email thread between Lucas and Thomas Anderson confirming the imminent asset transfer plan, with explicit mentions of using Hannah's trip as cover. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was criminal. Derek had called me at dawn. "We're serving the warrant tonight, but Claire..." "I know," I had cut in. "I'm going, I have to be there. Just be careful, he may suspect." I hung up without answering. Because of course Lucas suspected. He always suspected. By late afternoon, the Grand Wellington Hotel buzzed like a hive. A who's who of Boston's financial elite packed the gilded ballroom. Reporters lingered outside for photos. The Whitmore name still carried weight, even if the foundation beneath it was cracking. I arrived alone. Lucas had ensured that. I wasn't seated at the family table, wasn't in any of the key photo ops. As I slipped into my seat far back near the kitchen doors, Nathan caught my eye from across the room. He gave a small nod. Derek's team was in position. The room glittered with golden light and crystal, but beneath the glamour, I could feel the tension humming. Lucas, in a tailored midnight tuxedo, worked the crowd effortlessly, Hannah beaming on his arm. Her smile stabbed me. Was it genuine? Was it fear? Or had I already lost her? At 7:45, the lights dimmed. The band fell silent. A spotlight caught Lucas as he rose, champagne flute in hand. The toast. His moment. "Distinguished guests," he began, voice smooth as velvet. "Tonight is about love, about partnership, about building something that lasts." I gripped my clutch so tightly the metal frame dug into my palm. Next to me, Nathan sat tense, ready. "But lasting success," Lucas continued, "requires more than love. It requires vision. It requires courage to seize opportunity, no matter the odds." The words rang hollow, their double meaning clear to anyone who knew. Hannah gazed up at him, eyes shimmering. The room watched, rapt. "Tonight, I toast not only my beautiful bride," Lucas went on, "but the future we are creating together. Now or never." I rose, slow and deliberate. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Eyes turned. Murmurs rippled. Lucas faltered, just for a breath, as he spotted me walking toward the center of the room. His smile tightened. "Claire," he said, voice laced with false warmth. "I wasn't aware you had a speech prepared." I took the mic from the stand beside him, hands steady. "Just a few words," I said, voice carrying. I looked at Hannah first, her face open, trusting, then at Lucas, eyes narrowing, and then at the crowd. "Before you all toast this future," I began, "there is something you deserve to know." As of this morning, Whitmore Capital Partners is under active federal investigation for securities fraud and money laundering, and I have the evidence. Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped back, phones lifted, recording. Lucas's face drained of color. His glass froze mid-air. Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. And before this night is over, I finished. Every truth Lucas has hidden will come to light. Chapter 4. The toast that shattered everything. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Lucas stood frozen beside me, his champagne flute trembling slightly in his grip. Hannah stared, wide-eyed, her face a portrait of shock and betrayal. Across the room, murmurs built, like a gathering storm. Phones glowed as guests texted, recorded, whispered. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. "This is slander," he said, voice rising, a desperate edge bleeding through the practiced charm. "My fiancé's jealous sister, desperate for attention. There is no investigation, there is no evidence." I turned to face him fully, raising my phone. "Then why did your own CFO email this?" I asked calmly, projecting the contents of Nathan's encrypted file onto the ballroom's massive LED backdrop via my secure link. Lines of damning emails scrolled across the screen. "We create the narrative clients need to see. Transfer to Nassau account must clear before wedding weekend. Use Hannah's trip as cover." Gasps turned to outcries. A few guests rose from their seats. Investors huddled in frantic conversation. Reporters darted toward the exits to file breaking news. Lucas's face contorted. "Those are fabricated," he shouted. "Photoshopped lies." "Your own IT team won't back that up," I said coldly. "We already secured mirrored backups from your servers this morning." A ripple of alarm crossed his face. Then, like a cornered predator, he pivoted, eyes locking onto Hannah. "Darling," he began, voice softening into a dangerous croon. "You know me. You know this is her vendetta. She's always resented us." Hannah wavered visibly. Her gaze darted between me, Lucas, and the glowing evidence on the screen. "You told me," she began, voice shaking, "you told me those accounts were for a charitable fund." "They are," Lucas insisted. "I was going to surprise you on our honeymoon. She's twisting everything." I stepped forward, voice cutting through the noise. "No, Hannah. He's been using you as a pawn. The SES is executing warrants as we speak. If you go with him now, you could be complicit." Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to believe." Lucas grabbed her arm sharply. "We're leaving. Now." Before he could pull her away, a voice rang out across the room. "Federal agents! Mr. Whitmore, stand down." Derek entered with 2 agents in tow, badges raised. The room fell utterly silent. "Mr. Whitmore," Derek announced formally, "you are under investigation for securities fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You are not free to leave this venue." Lucas's grip on Hannah tightened. "You can't do this. This is my wedding." "It just became a crime scene," Derek replied coolly. As the agents approached, Lucas made one last move, shoving past Hannah. Sprinting toward a side exit, the crowd parted in shock. But 2 agents intercepted him cleanly, tackling him to the polished floor. Cameras flashed wildly. Hannah stood frozen amid the chaos, trembling. I moved to her side, gently taking her hand. "It's over, Hannah. You're safe now." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "Because I needed proof," I said softly. And now the whole world sees it. As Lucas was led out in cuffs, the ballroom, once shimmering with celebration, sat stunned and fractured. I looked at Hannah, her wedding dress now seeming grotesquely out of place amidst the scandal. "Come with me," I urged. She hesitated, then nodded, broken but beginning to understand. We walked out together, past the whispers, the stares, the flashbulbs. But deep down I knew this was just the beginning of the reckoning. Now that the truth is out, will Hannah find the strength to rebuild her life, or will the betrayal destroy her? Don't miss the next chapter. Chapter 5. The day her world collapsed. Sometimes the hardest part of betrayal isn't what you learn about someone else. It's what you learn about yourself and how blind love can make you. I held Hannah's trembling hand as we stepped out of the Grand Wellington ballroom and into the frigid night air. The hotel's ornate facade glowed behind us, a grotesque reminder of the night that was supposed to be her fairy tale, and had instead become a public unmasking. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just stood there on the sidewalk in her wedding gown, clutching the hem as though letting go of the fabric might cause her entire world to unravel. I kept silent, knowing this wasn't the moment for words. Some truths need air before they can be faced. Finally, her voice broke through the cold. How could I have been so stupid? I squeezed her hand gently. You weren't stupid. You trusted someone who worked very hard to make you believe in him. Her eyes glistened with fresh tears. I defended him, Claire. To you, to everyone. I told myself you were wrong. I told myself you were jealous. Her voice cracked. God, I was such a fool. I pulled her into a hug, the kind we hadn't shared in years. Tight, protective, the way I used to when we were kids and the world seemed safer. You weren't a fool, I whispered. You were in love, and that's not a crime. But I knew her wounds ran deeper than embarrassment. Lucas hadn't just manipulated her. He'd built her up. Her career, her public image, and now that scaffolding had collapsed in front of the entire city. When she pulled back, her face was pale, lips trembling. What happens now? She asked. Now we take one step at a time, I said softly. The SEC will move forward. The press will have a field day, but you'll get through this. Everyone will think I knew, she said, anguish in her voice, that I was part of it. Then we prove you weren't, I said. You cooperate fully, you tell the truth, and you rebuild. She looked at me then, truly looked, like the fog was finally clearing. Will you help me? Always. I led her to my car and drove us to my apartment. There was no way I was letting her spend the night alone in that luxury penthouse Lucas had bought to impress her and to control her. At my place, she changed into an old pair of my sweats and curled up on the couch, knees hugged to her chest. I keep thinking back, she murmured after a long silence. There were signs, little things. The way he'd changed the subject when I asked about certain clients, how he'd charm my friends but never let me see certain reports. Her voice grew harder. I ignored it all. I wanted to believe the story so badly. We all do sometimes, I said quietly. It's human. She looked down at her bare finger, where the engagement ring had been just hours ago. She had pulled it off in the car, her hands shaking so badly I had to take the ring and slip it into my purse. Claire, what if they charge me too? They won't, I said firmly. Nathan's evidence makes it clear you weren't involved, and I'll make sure the SEC knows that. You were a victim, not a conspirator. Her eyes brimmed again. I don't know who I am without him, she whispered. My job, my future, it was all tied to him. Then this is your chance to find out, I said gently. To build something that's truly yours. A long silence followed. Then she whispered, I want to fight back. I felt something shift in the room, a fragile, flickering strength. The first spark of the woman she could become. Then we will, I said, together, Hannah's words. I want to fight back, hung in the air like a fragile vow. I studied her face, pale and drawn beneath the soft lamplight of my living room. There was resolve there now. But beneath it, a raw undercurrent of shame, grief, and uncertainty. I knew she wasn't ready to stand alone yet. Not entirely, but the fact that she wanted to try, that was the beginning. Good, I said gently. But if we're going to do this, we do it right. No rash moves, no public statements yet. First we gather facts. We control the story before it controls you. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. Where do we start? Tomorrow, I said. We meet with Derek and the SEC team. You cooperate fully. Give them everything. Emails, texts, documents. You tell them exactly what you knew and what you didn't. Total transparency. I will, she whispered. And after that, I added, we plan your next step. Career, reputation, the life you want now, not the one Lucas built for you. Her gaze flickered with uncertainty. What career? Who would hire me after this mess? More people than you think, I said firmly. You didn't commit the fraud, and you can use your experience to help others avoid what happened to you. You've got a voice, Hannah. And now, a hard-earned perspective. She was quiet for a moment, processing. And what about him? She asked finally, her voice brittle. Lucas, what happens to him? That depends on the investigation, I said. But after what he pulled, and what Derek's team already has, I'd say prison is a very real possibility. A shadow crossed her face. I loved him, Claire, she said softly. God help me, even now part of me aches for the man I thought he was. I squeezed her hand. That's normal, I said gently. But what matters is what you do next. You saw the truth. Now you choose how to move forward. For the next hour we went over everything. Emails Hannah had access to, phone calls she could remember. Moments when Lucas had isolated her, manipulated her trust. The more she talked, the clearer the pattern became. He never let me see the real financial reports, she said at one point, frustration in her voice. Always said they were too complex or that Thomas handled them. I wanted to believe he respected my role at the firm. He never respected anyone, I said flatly. Not even you. Her eyes shimmered again, but she straightened her shoulders. Then it's time I start respecting myself. That night I set her up in the guest room. She insisted on keeping the door open, a small signal that she was letting me back in after the rift Lucas had driven between us. Long after she fell asleep, I sat in the living room scrolling through headlines already lighting up the internet. Whitmore wedding scandal explodes. SEC investigation confirmed. Boston power couple crumbles amid fraud allegations. Part of me felt relief. The truth was out. The damage Lucas had done was finally being confronted. But another part of me, a harder, colder part, knew this wasn't over. Public sympathy was fickle, and Lucas's allies, especially Thomas Anderson, wouldn't go down quietly. I opened an encrypted chat with Derek. We need to move on, Anderson. He's vulnerable now. A moment later, his reply came, already on it. Be ready. We may need Hannah's help. I exhaled, tension tightening my spine, because the next phase wasn't about surviving the scandal. It was about dismantling what Lucas had built, and ensuring no one else took his place. And to do that, Hannah would have to face far more than just public scrutiny. She would have to face the men who had used her, and the part of herself that had let them. Will Hannah find the courage to confront the powerful men who used her, or will the fight prove too much? Don't miss the next chapter. Chapter 6. The day she reclaimed her name. Rebuilding starts with a choice. To stop being defined by what was done to you and start defining who you want to be. 1 week after the wedding that wasn't, Hannah sat across from me in a gray-walled conference room at the Boston SEC field office. Her hair was tied back simply, no makeup, no mask. Just her. Raw, honest, determined. Gone was the woman draped in designer labels and curated smiles. In her place sat my sister, wounded but finally awake. Derek entered with 2 agents, nodding at her. Thank you for coming, Ms. Turner, he said. Your cooperation today matters more than you know. Hannah swallowed hard, then straightened. I'm ready. I want to help. I want the truth to be heard. As she began recounting everything she'd witnessed, conversations, suspicious transactions, the subtle ways Lucas and Thomas had kept her in the dark. I sat silently beside her, pride blooming in my chest. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't deflect blame. She owned her choices and her blind spots. "I should have asked more questions," she said quietly at one point, "but I wanted to believe in him. Now I want to make it right." Derek gave her a steady look. "And you will. What you're doing now takes courage most people never find." When the session ended, he pulled me aside. "She's a key witness now," he said, "and she'll be protected. But Claire, Lucas still has allies. The fight isn't over." "It won't be," I replied, "but neither is she." Later that night, back at my apartment, Hannah sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, fingers poised. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked up, eyes clearer than I'd seen in weeks. "Rebuilding," she said. "I'm drafting a statement. Not for the media, for me. I need to put this in my own words. I need to own my story before anyone else tries to." I nodded, throat tight. "You're stronger than you think," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "I have to be. For once. I'm doing this as Hannah Turner, not as Lucas Whitmore's fiancée." And as she typed the first words, "My name is Hannah Turner and this is my truth," I knew she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was taking her life back. By the next morning, Hannah's draft had become something more than a personal statement. It was a declaration of survival. "I believed in someone who betrayed me," it began, "but I refused to let his lies define who I am." I read it twice, heart swelling with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. "Are you sure you want to release this?" I asked gently. "Once it's out there, you can't take it back." She met my gaze, steady now. "I know, and I want to. I need to be the one to tell my story on my terms, not through headlines, not through Lucas's lawyers." With my help, we sent the statement to a trusted contact at the Boston Chronicle, a journalist known for integrity, not sensationalism. Within hours it went live. "Hannah Turner breaks silence. This is my truth." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in. Former clients, strangers, even women in similar situations reached out. Most were supportive. Some, inevitably, were not. But Hannah stood firm. "I can't control what people think," she told me, "but I can control what I stand for now." Meanwhile, Derek's team closed in on Thomas Anderson. Nathan sent word through encrypted chat. "Anderson's cracking. He wants a deal." And then, one last twist. A package arrived at my apartment, no return address. Inside, a flash drive and a single typed note. "For Hannah." The rest of the story. An old friend. I called Derek immediately. "We have something. Could be critical. Bring it in," he said. "But be careful. If Anderson's flipping, there are others who won't go down without a fight." As I prepared to leave, Hannah touched my arm. "Claire?" "Whatever's on that drive, I'm ready to know. All of it." I looked at her. Really looked. The sister I'd fought so hard to protect was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to face whatever came next. "Then let's finish this," I said. We left together, side by side. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey of truth, courage, and redemption. Claire's determination and Hannah's strength remind us that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought closest to home, and that reclaiming your name is not about erasing the past, but about owning your future. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more real, emotional family dramas. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is speaking the truth. No matter the cost. We'll see you in the next story.